This is Actualize Freedom, straight talk on growing clicks and conversions on Amazon FBA from people doing it every day. Now here's your host, digital marketing acrobat, Danny Kenji Carlson.
What's up, guys? Danny Carlson here with the Actualize Freedom Podcast. And today we're talking to someone from South Africa, a country that a lot of you have probably not heard of. I personally don't know very many entrepreneurs or different people in the Amazon space from South Africa, but today we have Rael Lowenthal. He's here with a company called Z, which we're going to get into more in a minute. But basically, this episode is going to be diving a lot into Amazon Europe and what a goldmine this turned into for Amazon sellers today. So let's just start things off here, Rael, by giving us a little bit of a background by how you came to be doing what you're doing today, and what's your experience?
Cool, Danny. Thanks so much for having us today, and a big hi to the listeners. So a little bit about me. I studied an accounting and finance degree, with an honors. It's called a chartered accountancy degree in South Africa. I did 3 years of training with an investment bank, both in South Africa and the UK. Obviously helping companies get access to debt and equity capital across various divisions. I then left the bank looking for something a little bit more commercial. And what better space to be in than the e-commerce space at the moment, especially around international expansion. I feel like we're on the precipice of people actually understanding what opportunities they have, specifically e-commerce sellers, to actually expand their businesses around the world. So what I do actually has nothing to do with what I studied. But again, it was more just to get some background in business. Business has always been a huge interest of mine. And here I am today. We're Z. We'll get into the details a little bit later, but my official position here is Director of Business Development. So I'm responsible for getting new clients and making sure our existing clients are happy with our services and are using them regularly.
Yeah, and you mentioned one really interesting thing there, which is actual capital and taking on loans and things like that, which is really important to expanding to different marketplaces. So one thing that a lot of newer sellers, they don't really understand about an e-commerce business or just having your own product brand is that most of the time to grow the company in a really solid way, you're going to need capital, right? It's very rare that I see a company grow very quickly into an 8-figure company that doesn't have a pretty solid credit line, or they took on some kind of loan against their inventory or something like that. So anyone who has a kind of debt is a dirty word in your mind, I would challenge you to be open to learning about this kind of stuff, because it really is a fundamental part of growing these types of businesses. So would you agree that a lot of the brands that you're working with or that you've seen they're taking on some kind of debt or credit line to expand to other marketplaces and expand the product lines?
So I think, look, it's not necessarily specific to a new destination. I think in any business where you're turning inventory into cash, you need solid working capital management, and a part of very good working capital management is taking out short-term working capital finance to invest money into stock, so that can be in after a certain amount of time be turned into or transferred into cash. I think where Amazon sellers or e-commerce sellers have a huge advantage is that they don't actually sell on credit. So everything that they sell is in cash, so that it reduces the time taken to convert the money that they've invested in their inventory into cash. I think I would agree with you 100%. In any e-commerce business that's looking to expand and needs to take on additional stock, you're going to need additional financing to do so, and unless you've got that cash on hand. It's not a topic that comes up quite regularly with our clients. I think that it's kept quite separate, just in terms of their own business management. But I think, just logically speaking, if you're going to expand into a new destination, you're going to need additional stock, and that's going to require additional investment of your cash or potentially a credit line.
Yeah, and I think it's important to to just add the caveat that taking out credit for the right reasons and the wrong reasons, there's a difference, right? So if you're taking out a line of credit against inventory that you have, let's say you have $100,000 worth of inventory, and then you take out a $100,000 credit line, that's really not that risky because, you know, you have $100,000 of inventory that you will sell through at some point. It's going to take a month or two to actually sell through that inventory, right? So the risk is not as big as if you got a $100,000 credit line and then you just decided to go spend $100,000 on Facebook ads that may or may not work. That's probably, it's a much larger risk, right? So I just want to put that caveat out there before we dive into the Amazon expansion here. So I guess the natural first question here is, what markets do you see the big opportunities for Amazon sellers outside of just the US market?
Yeah, so look, you know, the US market is the largest retail consumer market in the world, right? So by volume and by value, the US is by far the biggest. It's also the most competitive. So, you know, generally speaking, yes, you know, if you can make it big in America, that's, you know, pretty much, a straight shot to success, right? I think what people tend to forget, especially the sellers that are actually based in the US, you know, obviously being used to such a big retail consumer market, there's huge opportunities in other destinations too, right? Where people want the same type of products. You know, it's generally around consumer goods, and although, you know, cultures may be different and languages may be different in other countries, that doesn't necessarily mean that people don't want the same, you know, type of consumer goods that you can get on Amazon. And I think that, you know, often we speak to Amazon sellers, and, you know, we're speaking about growth and where can they get growth from. And really, it's come down to two things. One, they can go and source new products to sell in their existing market. Everyone knows how difficult new product development can be. And then the second is taking your existing profitable products that you sell in your local market and then selling them in a new international market. In terms of where is the most opportunity, I think, you know, if you just talk about size of the marketplaces outside of the US, the UK is number 2, and then Europe, you know, the 6 pan-European destinations together, but mainly Germany is the 3rd. And then from there, it kind of levels out to, you know, Canada, Mexico, Japan, Singapore, UAE is, you know, sort of a sort of newer market like the Middle East. There's a lot of hype around Amazon in the Middle East. And then there's also Australia, which is a slightly smaller country, but also a very new market. And, you know, if you can be first to market there, there's definitely scope for opportunities there.
Yeah, and a lot of people assume that you need to have a listing translations and everything like that. But actually, we've worked with some clients who are selling in markets that, like Japan, for example, is a market where you would assume that you would have to have everything in Japanese, and you probably should if you're really going to take it seriously. But we work with some clients who they just upload their English listings to the Japanese marketplace, and that's good enough because the marketplace has very low quality competition, and it's really there's not that many barriers as people might think. So maybe that's a good time to ask you, like, what are the biggest barriers you think that are stopping the most Amazon sellers from expanding to some of these growing marketplaces like Germany and in different marketplaces in the EU? Is it really like, are people blowing this out of proportion that it's so difficult when it's really not, or are there legitimately some really big hurdles that are stopping people from doing it?
So in our world, I think there are probably 3 of the biggest barriers to entry, or what, maybe not barriers to entry, but what scares people the most about trying to go into another market outside of their local market is, number 1 is tax compliance. Number 2 is making sure that the products are compliant both for import and for sale in that destination country, and then sourcing the right logistics provider and importer of record to be listed on the import documentation so that the goods can actually clear customs successfully. So I would say those are the, you know, for me, are the 3 biggest stumbling blocks for people who want to get overseas or get into a new market. And you know, finding the right partner to do so is actually the most important thing. So, you know, it's not expected of an Amazon seller in the US to fully understand tax and VAT law in the UK and Germany, as an example, right? But if you find the right partner to guide you along the way, that really makes the process a lot more simple. So to answer your question, the barriers to entry are there. There is a lot of complexity to navigate. But if you've got somebody who's focusing on this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we've made that pretty simple to navigate for clients. So it takes the complexity away from them. They can focus on their listings, their PPC, maybe translations, product labels, things like that. But and we can take really the tax compliance, the product compliance, the importing and logistics, and package it into a service to really help the clients get into those new destinations.
Yeah, and let's talk about the big scary one that people always talk about, right? The VAT, and it's a big high percentage number that scares people away, and it's it's intimidating to go through all the paperwork and have the confidence that you're doing it properly. So can you tell us a little bit about just VAT in general to someone who, they've heard about it and they kind of know it, but they're not confident enough that they want to go ahead and apply and get it all sorted out?
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest misconception in e-commerce, in the e-commerce space, specifically around FBA in the UK and Europe, is people think that once they've got a VAT registration and an EORI number, that's enough. Right now they can trade, they can import, they can do everything that they need. And I think it needs to be split into two parts. The requirement for a VAT registration in both the UK and the EU is triggered by the fact that the foreign importer will be storing goods in the country. That's where the legal requirement comes from, is if you're going to be storing inventory in one of those countries, you are legally required to have a VAT registration. That's number one. Number two, the VAT registration and EORI number gives you it's basically like an identification with the local authorities to say, okay, there is a foreign seller that's going to be trading in this country. And because VAT is charged on consumer goods, there's VAT that needs to be paid over to the officials. So that's once the sales happen. And then one step before that is when the goods actually arrive at customs, there's import VAT that needs to be paid over upon import. And that import VAT is actually reclaimable against the sales VAT that you make at a later stage. And a significant part of the service offer that we provide to our clients is to make sure that the import documentation is prepared in a way that facilitates that VAT reclaim. So in practice, what will happen is the client will have a VAT provider that does the filings for them on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. It just depends on the client's needs in the country. And then part of that VAT filing, there needs to be a customs clearance document that goes in there that shows the amount of import VAT that was paid customs. So that it can be reclaimed from the local officials. And, it is a big number. It's 19 to 21% in Europe. But what people must realize is that they actually have the ability to get that back upon import and claim it against the VAT that gets charged on sale.
Okay, so then after you deduct that amount, what are people looking at, right? 19 to 21% at the top line. But if you factor in what you're deducting from your importing, what can people expect?
So it's the consumer is the person in the cycle that actually pays the VAT. So the importer, pays it upon import, but gets it back from the government. And then when the customer purchases the product, they are the ones that pay the price of the product plus the VAT, and then that VAT is then sent off to the local government. So the seller actually, that 19 to 21% it's not legally bound by the seller themselves. They don't actually pay that tax. They get it back. So what they need to do is just consider when they're pricing the goods what their price will be. Let's say $100, and then they've got to add the 19 to 21%, so $19 to $21 on top of their sale price, so that can be collected and remitted to the local government. So what's a cost to the seller is actually the non-refundable duties, that are charged on the products based on their HS codes, but the VAT is actually a tax that is paid for by the end customer.
Right, but if people were to calculate, because it's totally different than how it works in the United States, right? Like if you calculated the amount that you would deduct from, let's say it's 21, let's say it's a flat 20% that they would be adding on to the sales price, right? So they add 20% onto there. And then whatever percentage they have already paid on the import tax, what do you think would be like the total of the purchase price? Are we talking about it goes down to like 15% or 18% roughly, or does it really vary kind of depending on the import tax for the category that you have imported for?
So
now we're getting into like complex
again,
spreadsheet math here. I know this is hard to give more than just very approximate answers for these kind of things.
No, so not at all. I think the thing to understand about VAT or GST is that it's a tax that is borne by the end customer. So although there's a cash flow implication for the seller when the goods are imported, they are actually entitled to get that back if their filing is done correctly and if their import is done correctly. So we talked about working capital management at the beginning of the show, and that's really the implication that needs to be taken into account by the seller, because there's going to be a 19 to 21% of the value of the product upon import that they're going to have to outlay in cash, and that they'll only receive back in 3 months or potentially 6 months from that point. But they will get it back, and it's not an actual cost to them, because the end customer is the party in the transaction that's actually paying the VAT in the end.
Right. I mean, so a lot of people do get scared by that, though. I'm wondering if you have seen the situation where I think Amazon is getting more better cracking down on this, but for a while, anyways, there was a lot of Chinese brands that were just really getting away without, like, they just weren't paying their VAT tax, right? And so essentially, they're able to take 20% off the top for the end customer, and obviously get a lot of sales for that, but then, obviously they're in a lot of trouble for not being tax compliant. Have you seen this problem still happen, or do you think that Amazon's pretty much been able to crack down on these bad actors?
So I think Amazon are the ones that probably, okay, let's take a step back. The customs officers around the world are the ones that identified some of the Far East sellers, pretty much getting into fraud, tax fraud or VAT fraud, and that really had to do with the value that they were declaring to customs of their product when the goods were being imported. So what ended up happening is they would completely undervalue their product. So let's say the product cost them $5 to make, they were declaring it at $1, and 20% on $1 is a lot less than 20% on $5, right? So that in the end, they were paying a lot less. They had a lot less of a cash flow implication. And then further down the line, when it actually came down to the sales, prior to 1 July, the seller was responsible for collecting and remitting the sales VAT to pay it over to the local authorities. From 1 July, all the rules changed, and Amazon actually collects all of the sales VAT and remits it directly to the government. So it takes away that ability of the seller to not pay their VAT. So that's kind of how they clamp down on it. On the import side, some countries have changed the way that the products need to be valued at customs to avoid the under-declaration of value of their products, so that makes sure that the government gets paid up front, number one. And then on the sales side of things, the marketplaces like Amazon have now taken on the responsibility for collecting and remitting the sales VAT directly to the authorities, so it actually doesn't give the seller a chance to try and defraud the government.
Yeah, I think that's a good move for everyone involved, except for obviously the scam artists from China who are getting away with it. But I don't think it's a good idea to try to compete with everyone by doing things that are illegal and are going to get you in a lot of trouble or very big fines, or potentially thrown in jail if we're talking about tax fraud and stuff like that. So don't want to be doing that, guys. So, and then what is the obligations look like in this case? So like how many, it would be like every time that a shipment gets shipped into one of these countries that has the VAT, there would need to be some customs paperwork done, and that would, it's pretty much just at that point now, because Amazon is taking the VAT from the actual sale, or are there other obligations as well when it comes to the tax?
So upon import, there will be two obligations when it comes to tax. The first is the VAT, right, which is a standard percentage that's applied against whatever value is declared to customs, and that depends on the country. The second obligation when it comes to tax is non-refundable taxes. So those are calculated and are driven by the HS code, the harmonized tariff code that is attached to the product. So just to give you an example, like an electronic mouse that's wireless, for example, will have a specific HS code for a specific country. That HS code is what identifies, let's say, the 3% non-refundable duties that are applied to that product. That needs to be paid over to the government. That the seller needs to pay that over to the government.
Right. Essentially the same as what the United States has, right? The United States and most countries would have just based on the category of the product, you're going to pay a certain percentage. Plastic products usually higher and things like that. Is it pretty much what you're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Where the US differs from countries that have a VAT system is that in the US, there's no import VAT or GST, as you guys call it, general sales tax, that needs to be paid over. It's only the non-refundable duties driven by the harmonized tariff code. And then there's on a state level, you have different sales tax rules that, again, the marketplaces in those different states are required to collect and remit directly to the US government. I think there's actually only 4 states where that doesn't happen, where the seller is still required to report and remit the sales tax to the US government. But yeah, that's really the main differentiator between importing into the US and importing, let's say, into Europe, is the VAT component. And really, we help especially our US sellers who are not so familiar with the VAT system to navigate those differences.
Okay, and then what about the big scary thing that happens, which is when people's shipments get seized by customs? What are the most common reasons that customs would seize a shipment? Is it like missing paperwork, or what are the big common problems or mistakes that sellers would be making?
So I'm gonna apply it specifically to Amazon FBA, just for the purposes of the example. So as you know, as an FBA seller, you remain the owner of your inventory all the way until it reaches the Amazon Fulfillment Center. Then Amazon facilitate the last mile sale and distribution on your behalf. But all the way up until that point, the seller remains the owner of the inventory. So when they've imported the goods into their local market, generally there shouldn't be too many problems unless their freight forwarder hasn't assisted them with the customs clearance and their customs broker. But the main issue when you're a seller that's looking to expand into a new market is now you become a foreign importer of those products, because your business entity and office is not located in the country in which you're importing. And in order to successfully import those products into that country, customs offices around the world require that a local business, so with a local address, a physical presence, directors and employees, get listed on the import documentation to take on the customs responsibility of that import, which includes, liability for unpaid duties and taxes, some product responsibility, and various others, in order for the goods to successfully move through the customs process. So the biggest issue that sellers face when they're looking to import into a new country is that they don't have that importer of record in place before the goods arrive. So the goods get stuck at customs because the customs officers are saying, hey, you're a foreign importer based in the USA. You're not based in the UK or Europe. We need a UK or European based company to take responsibility for this import. And you can think about it kind of logically. The reason they do that is because you could literally have hundreds of millions of foreign importers, getting into your country that are liable for taxes and various other things. And the local customs officers just want to simplify their process. They don't want to go running all over the world trying to find foreign importers to pay their duties and taxes or to take responsibility for their products. So they've simplified that process by making it a legal requirement to have a local importer. And how this applies to Amazon is that Amazon have categorically stated they will never act as the local importer on behalf of their sellers. And really, that's the niche that we're filling for our sellers, aside from a few other value-added services as well. But really, that's the main focus. We will provide the global network of offices that we have around the world to Amazon sellers to leverage off that infrastructure to be able to facilitate their imports into new countries.
Awesome. So yeah, that's a really key term, the importer of record. So essentially that's, if I understand this correctly, that's essentially a local business that can be held accountable for potentially bad actors, right? Otherwise, if they just let all these foreign businesses just import products all the time, then it's very hard for a government to go after all these foreign businesses. They really, they don't have any leverage over foreign businesses if they want to just not follow the rules, right? So you're, as an importer of record, you're essentially just taking responsibility and any liability that of something that might go wrong, making sure that it is done properly, and just like you being the legal responsible person, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what leads on to the other value added services that we're offering to our clients, because of that risk that we take on, we have built an incredible technology that classifies our clients' products according to their appropriate HS codes to make sure that when the goods arrive, the appropriate duties and taxes are paid. We have an intellectual property base of the customs valuation requirements for all of the countries in which we service, so to make sure that the goods are actually declared at the appropriate price. And then as a third to that, we do a full assessment on our products, on our clients' products, to make sure that they are, one, legal for sale in that new country, and then two, legal for import in that country. And getting into the UK and Europe with different product types that do come with different product compliance responsibilities, and our team will help our clients navigate those waters to make sure that the products are fully compliant for sale and for import before we actually facilitate any of those imports.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I've been living in Bali, Indonesia for the past 3 years or so, and there's an interesting trade here. One of the big, Indonesia is a pretty big producer of this plant called kratom, which is this, it's a plant to kind of, you drink it in a tea and it gives you a similar kind of effect as coffee. So it's a stimulant, and it's totally legal in Indonesia, but it's completely illegal in many other countries in the world. And there's quite a few kratom businesses here that their cost to produce this stuff is super low in Indonesia, but they can sell it for, hundreds of times what they produce it for in other countries where it's illegal, right? Because the prices are very high in these other countries, and they have absolutely no incentive to follow the laws of the other country or to, or for anything, right? It's anyone doing business in Indonesia that is never planning on leaving Indonesia, that another country is never going to successfully go after and jail someone from Indonesia or something like that. So there's quite a few of these kratom businesses here that just continually are shipping illegal products into all these other countries around the world, and that's totally fine. No one's coming after them. So importer of record, it's probably a good thing to have in place.
Absolutely. Look, the truth is that anything can pretty much be done illegally, right? That pretty much takes away all barriers to entry to do anything. Our business is really focused around clients that want to build long-term sustainable brands, potentially looking for exits to some of the big aggregators. And in order to do that, in any long-term sustainable business, it needs to be done according to the law, and it needs to be done correctly. And that's really what we're trying to give to the market is, if you're an Amazon seller and you want to sell into a new market and you're looking to build a sustainable long-term brand, and you want your business to be compliant, our technology and our systems and our people will really help you get there.
And so one question that a lot of people are probably having is, when is a brand big enough that, in your opinion, it makes sense for them to start expanding from the US market over to the European markets and other markets and everything like that? Like, should they be at roughly a certain revenue level, or what do you think is a good kind of range for them to start considering it versus them just being a little bit too small to worry about it just yet?
So it's a great question, and I think there's no specific size or revenue target that you should be looking for before you expand internationally. I work with clients all the way from, one man operation sending a couple of boxes a month into a US fulfillment center of pet toothbrushes that now is selling the same amount, or maybe a little bit less, but similar amount, doubled the size of his business by getting it into the UK. Because there's a market for it there, all the way up until an Amazon aggregator that has 30 or 40 brands under their umbrella, and they're looking to get those brands into new marketplaces. So there's really no specific size or target that you should get. My advice is, if you have a profitable product in your local market, and you feel like you've reached a saturation point there, it's at that point in time now that, and you don't want to introduce new products, it's at that point that you should start looking to expand internationally.
Yeah, because from my understanding, there's not a massive outlay of capital that needs to happen in order to, become compliant and everything like that, right? I mean, obviously you have to make some investments, but it's not like, not anything that's prohibitive that you can't do without a loan or a big chunk of cash. It's just kind of, you're paying as you're importing more and more inventory, right? You're paying with the additional, customs duties, taxes, and obviously you need to pay for more inventory, right? So if you're expanding your inventory, you need to outlay for the inventory. But I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. This is not something where you have to go and make a big, huge investment and just hope it works. You can test it out on a smaller scale.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people look at Amazon's restock limits as being very prohibitive, and don't get me wrong, they are. But I think their stock limits actually play into that narrative for a new destination to say, look, you can't go and send a full container at a time. The first time you're looking to sell your products into that new market. So, you might be limited to 200 units or 1,000 units, whatever it may be. And that's a really good way for you to start. So, if you were going to import 3 pallets into the US for sale, order another pallet of product from your manufacturer, and let's get that 1 pallet, within your stock limits into your new destination country. Even if you may not get it there at the target margin that you're looking for, starting to getting products there, as your stock limits start to increase, so will then the economies of scale start to increase, and then you'll start to reach the same margins that you would have targeted at the beginning. So to answer your question, it doesn't require a huge capital outlay. The compliance cost, not so much. Probably the biggest cost in getting into the UK or Germany is a VAT registration, but Amazon VAT services have pretty much made that for free. And for the first year as well. So that, that takes that whole cost out. So really it comes down to logistics cost, product cost, and then the import compliance costs.
Yeah, so really not a huge cash outlay, which is definitely encouraging. And I think it's really important for people to, if you understand what you're getting into more and you understand the risks and the potential pitfalls of what you're doing, then it's just less scary and you can more confidently just go and get it done. So I think it's important to cover, like, what are the penalties for making mistakes, like if you just totally didn't submit your VAT correctly and stuff like that, or you're messing things up, and like what kind of penalties are we looking at? Are we talking about certain fines, or are we talking about going to jail? Like what is the penalties?
So look, each country has different rules and will have different sanctions for different, the different non-compliance, whether it comes to VAT or duties or importing, etc. I think in order to avoid that in its entirety, you need to partner with someone that actually understands that particular market, so as to mitigate that risk pretty much down to zero. I wouldn't be able to tell you the specific fines or penalties for specific countries. It really differs per country. But the focus should be more on making sure you get it done right first, and then you don't really have to worry about any of those penalties or sanctions coming through at all.
Yeah, like I would imagine we're probably not talking about like a criminal offense like going to jail unless you're pretty blatantly committing fraud or something like that, right? Like if you just forgot you're a little bit late on your payments for tax or something like that, or you did something incorrectly, maybe we're talking a small fine, hundreds of dollars or low thousands of dollars, not like something that's going to end your business, right?
Yeah, it's not going to be something that ends your business. Again, it depends on the non-compliance. If you completely evading tax requirements in its entirety, that can lead to criminal sentences. But if you have a late payment, or you just miscalculated something, generally that's penalties and interest, not anything criminal or civil.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, even if you're working with a company like Z, I think it's just important to at least understand the fundamentals of what you are responsible for, your tax requirements and all those kind of things, because ultimately you as the business owner are going to be held responsible for let's say you had an accountant, for example, who was committing tax fraud of some kind. The accountant's not held responsible. You're going to be held responsible as the business, right? Or the business owner. So I think it's important to at least understand the basics, because I've met so many people here in Bali, like after living in Bali for 3 years, where there's lots of expats who are from all different countries, and many of them have been living here for a year or longer. And a lot of them just aren't paying tax anywhere, which is, depending on what country you're from, is almost always not legal of some kind. They're not following either Indonesia's tax law because they've been here for so long, or they haven't actually fully gotten rid of their tax liability in their home country. So, and most of these people, they just don't know, right? They just, it stresses them out to go and research it, and it's just super hard to find correct information. So they just say, screw it, I'll deal with it later for years on end, right? So I think it's important to just learn, just get the core basics until you can understand the basics of it. And then if you want to go, hire another company to do it, that's great. And that's probably the best for most people listening. But at least you can sleep at night knowing that you're doing it properly, and you're not just going to wake up one day and get a phone call from whichever government just coming after you for 3 years of missed taxes or something like that.
No, definitely. And if you're building a team of people that are going to be running your business, there needs to be somebody that's responsible for that. If you're an individual, living in another country, and you're avoiding or just kind of ignoring your tax responsibilities, again, that's a personal choice, and it's something that should be avoided. But in the context of an e-commerce business, I understand a lot of the time this is somebody's side hustle, or may not be their fully focused business. But in any kind of business venture, compliance, so be it product, tax, or import compliance, those are 3 things that need to be considered very carefully before just going ahead and doing things. Because you're right, you can get into trouble. The internet is a plethora of information that can be found, and again, it's very hard to navigate what is actually right, what is wrong. Does it apply to me? And again, the capital cost of contracting a company that can help you navigate those waters, I think, is a much lesser cost than the potential stress and penalties and fines that come as a result of non-compliance. And I think it's a part of trading in e-commerce that's actually quite heavily ignored by a lot of sellers. They're not really too interested in it. But again, like I say, if you want to build a long-term sustainable brand that's going to grow and have exit potential, compliance is a very important part of the game, and must be considered carefully before expanding or going on any of these ventures.
Yeah, and guys, Rael might be biased about working for a company that actually does this stuff, but from my personal experience, it is so much better to work with a company that understands financial things and tax things than to try to figure it out yourself. Because I was that guy who, I was reading this, it's some heinously long book, more than 1,000-page book on Canadian tax law, when I first opened my business 5 years ago. And it was just, I read the whole book only to realize that it's I don't want to try to do this myself. This is so complicated and so ridiculous. To be an expert in tax and anything financial, really, you got to be in that stuff every day. And if you're like me, which most of you are, you don't enjoy it. It's not everyone's favorite thing to open up spreadsheets and try to understand cash flow projections and all these numbers and tax compliance and everything like that. So worth the money to work with the company. And it just avoids so many headaches too, because being that guy who tried to do it himself for the first couple of years in business, I ran into a bunch of different situations where I ended up having to pay someone more to fix my negligence than I would have if I just got someone to do it properly from the beginning. So that would be my advice for people. If you want to actually do it yourself, probably best to stay away unless you're really confident in your financial acumen.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I do have a bias, of course. I work for a compliance business, but yeah, it's something that definitely should be considered, and people should really take it into account. Like you say, the cost of doing it beforehand will be a lot less than the cost of doing it afterwards.
Yeah, totally echo you on that. So, Rael, we're at the end of our time here, but this has been a really valuable conversation here, especially for people who are looking to take that next step and expand to Europe. Can you just give us a brief overview of what your company Z.co is doing for Amazon sellers and where people can reach out to you guys if they want to hear more?
Sure. So we maybe should have started there, but maybe it's a good place to end as well. Our business is an importer of record specialist for e-commerce sellers, with a specific focus on Amazon FBA. We have value-added services such as product compliance, be it both for sale and for import. And then we also have a value-added logistics solution, so we pretty much become an end-to-end solution of getting your inventory from country A to your new country of sale. The best place to go and look at a little bit more detail about what we do is on our website. It's www.z.co. Alternatively, for your listeners, you can reach out directly to me. My email address is rael@z.co. So it's RAEL and another L @zee.co. And then I will personally attend to your request and see how we can assist you. And I think, what would be beneficial for your listeners, we actually are running our Black Friday special for the entire month of December. So you do get a 50% discount on your first transaction with us. So I think that's a nice incentive if it is something that will work for you. And just a huge thank you, Danny, for having us on the show. It was a really great conversation. Personally, I love talking about this world and what we do for Amazon sellers. I think we add a lot of value to their businesses. I think if people want to hear a little bit more about us and if they're searching for credibility, there's our CEO did a podcast on Scott Needham's The Smartest Amazon Seller podcast. He's also one of our clients. So he can talk about, he talks about his personal experience with us and how we assisted him in expanding one of his products into both Australia and Mexico.
Yeah, Scott's a great seller. We've had him on the podcast, I think, numerous times, and nine-figure seller. He's got a lot of experience selling lots of products. So, but awesome. We'll put the links to everything Rael just mentioned at the blog post for this episode, as always, at kenjiroy.com/blog. And until next time, guys, go out there, kick some ass, and thanks for your time, Rael.
For show notes and resources mentioned in this episode, visit kenjiroi.com.